Oh, hi everyone, my name is Nigel Scott. I'm a chair, an independent director and also a non-executive director across a range of businesses and charities. Prior to that I was a senior executive in financial services before moving into governance. I tend to focus now on early stage higher growth businesses, and one of the very important topic in that space is changing the board as a business scales, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
Hi, welcome to Governance Bites. My name is Banicevich, and as you just heard today, I have the pleasure of spending time with Nigel Scott. Nigel, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
This topic is a really interesting one about changing the board as the company scales. And as you said, you do some governance work in startup businesses as well as scale-up businesses. So you've got some experience in this space. So the first question I have for you then is, what fundamentally changes in governance when a business moves from startup through to scale-up?
Yeah, so it's around the state of the business, what the business requires, and the evolving strategy. And it is quite a different skill set from being on a startup board through to a scale-up. And it's, for directors, they've really got to look at it and go, look, am I good for the journey throughout that cycle? Have I got an interest in specialisation in more than one over the other? And really the trick is the director being honest with themselves and going, actually, at what stage and where am I going to play? And also the chair of the board having that oversight and going, what does the company need? What does the board need? And have I got the right skills around the board table and have enough courage to make those calls, because they can be challenging.
Right, that makes sense. What triggers a founder-led board to stop being fit for purpose?
Yeah, so you've really got to look at it, and you can do board reviews, you can do skills matrices, which I'm a big fan of. And as a business matures, you really should be sitting down at least annually and looking at your strategy and what you've got coming up, and going, okay, like a CEO does with his management team, have I got the right leadership team around me to deliver what I have promised to the board? And then, as I said, with the chair, they've got to look at it and go, have I got the right set of skills to support the management as we transition and deliver on the strategy? And have I got the right people around the oversight and the skills to add to what the business needs?
Right. What are the warning signs that a founder board dynamic is not serving the business anymore?
There's always the challenge where people are like, oh, I've still got more to add, and I've been here a long time and I've got this amount of experience and so forth. So you've really got to come up with some ways to prevent that. But when you start to hear that language come in, or you start to get more disagreements, and then maybe a little bit of politicking starts to go on, there's some of the triggers to go, actually maybe the board's not that harmonious, and is this going to improve or isn't it? But everyone likes the excitement and the challenge of being in a startup to scale up. But not everyone's fit for the journey.
Yeah, right. You mentioned before board evaluations. How frequently would you do those evaluations in the early stage of a business? Because that's probably one of the key methods through some honest feedback that you identify those gaps.
Yeah, and it really comes down to how you select your board, because a lot of it in the startup is, oh, who's put in the biggest check, or who do I know, and these sorts of things, and it's not always the right way to look at it. But looking at the board evaluation, and there are a number of ways to do it. As a business gets more mature, you can, and we have done this, actually had a board observer come in from a board evaluation business and actually seen the dynamics at play.
Right.
And then done separate interviews with directors and provided feedback, which has been quite illuminating. But of course you don't really have the time or maybe even the money to do those in the earlier stages, so you can do your own skills matrix. But the way that we tend to do it is, we'll do a board evaluation once a year. And that's really as simple as a set of sort of 30 odd questions that each director answers, and then we collate it and discuss it as a group. But the skills matrix is the right one, and the one that I use, which has evolved, and I do tweak it for different businesses, that might have sort of 15 to 20 different skills that we're looking for, whether it's governance or maybe some operational expertise or industry expertise, and then right through to marketing and legal and the usual housekeeping type ones. And then we just look at it across the board and make sure that we're trying to cover everything and not doubling up on too much. Otherwise we'll end up with a bit of group think and everyone approaching it from the same perspective.
Right, that makes sense. What is the primary role of a board at startup stage versus scale-up stage?
Yeah, so probably in the early stage it's about survival, right? And that's access to capital, what I call smart capital, and this is where you can use your shareholder base quite strategically. So we just don't want investors that are along for the ride and want to get an update every quarter or half a year, whatever it is. You want people with connections where the CEO or the MD can ring them up and go, hey, I've got a bit of a problem, or do you know this person that you could introduce me to? And that's also a challenge for directors because, as I like to say, it's noses in and fingers out. So you've got to be careful not to cross that line where you're in there being an executive, or this is how we did it in my day, and you've got to let the MD or the CEO run with that freedom, but they have to be supported.
Yeah.
And that's really important because you're basically bootstrapping a business in the early stages. And then, of course, as a business gets further along and bigger, and if you're going into different markets and offshore expansion, which we're doing with one of our businesses, that is quite a different skill set. And you go, okay, well, we've got to go and crack this market. Who do we need to get in to help us do that? And that's very different from setting up on day one and getting the business moving.
So a couple of things in there. One is at the early stages, your directors are often also going to be almost consulting to the business as well, whether it's providing skills or providing resources, contacts, those sorts of things. And the major need of a business at that stage, as well as that initial skill set, is money. So there's a huge portion of it's going to be capital raising. And then as you scale, the capital raising necessity will hopefully reduce, although sometimes that expansion requires its own capital, but you're going from startup capital more into second round or third round raises, which can be a bit different in itself. But then you also need expertise in different areas such as different markets and international expansion, those sorts of things. Yeah,
and the capital is an interesting one because the normal life cycle of a business, I've got a great idea, you rope in the friends and the family and their connections, and then you're into the high net worths, and then you're into sort of maybe it's VC or PE or institutional money over a number of years, and that's quite different to have to they're different audiences, right? They need different things, and the more you get into that mature, the higher the degree of information the investor wants, the reporting that they want. They're looking at the board a little more critically, particularly if you're an institution, and going, actually, who are these people? Do I know them? And they might even want to talk to them as well, not just the chair.
Yes.
And then you sort of get into the whole thing around roadshows and keeping your investors up to date and that sort of thing. So the need for capital will always be there, but the type and the source of capital will evolve and be quite different.
Yes, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How does the balance between governance and hands-on support shift over time? I guess we've kind of alluded to that earlier, that in the early stages, your director's probably going to be providing a lot of support and scaling back as the business scales and you get more money and expertise to be able to hire full-time people into the business. How does that change?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because you're at the start, you're involved, you're asking a director to come and actually do something, and then at some point you're kind of asking them to not do something, right? And I've had challenges in the past where it's taken quite a bit to get founder shareholders who have participated in the business, and rightly so, actually out of the business, right? And that's been a challenge. That can take some months, right? And you've got to sort of, when they come out, you've got to give them information in a different way, but you've got to have the conversation and go, hey, look, we've just taken on a head of sales or a CTO or a chief revenue officer, or what happens to be, and thanks for what you've done in the past. But that's not a here today, gone tomorrow discussion. It normally evolves over time, which makes it a little bit more awkward because it's a transitionary process. Yeah.
Because a new person coming in full-time or part-time or whatever that may be will probably lean on that director.
It's important for them to get the history. But if you're recruiting into a business and have been a CEO of a business, you're bringing someone on because you've got a job they need to do, but you also bring them on for their ideas and their input, particularly at a leadership level. And so they've got to have the freedom to be able to do that. And one thing that does make a leadership team nervous is overreach by a board in their day job. Right? And it makes it awkward.
So once you've got that leadership team in place, it has the chairs to kind of pull the director team back.
So what we'll do is as we have our board meetings, we'll normally schedule the leadership team. They might present 2 or 3 times a year and that's how we get their view, and then they come in and speak to their part of the business. Whereas earlier on, the CEO tends to front it to the board, and everything kind of goes through them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. We've talked a little bit about this, about board composition and how that changes as the company grows. Initially you're going to be bootstrapping, as you said before, so your early directors are going to be quite hands-on. How does the board composition change as the company grows?
Yeah, you've got to keep coming back to that skill set and back to your strategy, right? So this is what we've got to deliver on, which is exactly, as I said before, how the CEO would approach, and the board would expect the CEO to approach their leadership team.
Yes.
Like that evolves, and the board is no different. And one sort of approach that I favour is that the board is a defined term for a director, right? 3 years.
Right.
And then at the end of the 3 years, it's actually, because ultimately the shareholders make the decision,
yes.
right? So the chair's got to have to go back to the shareholders and go, well, we want to renew this term because this person adds this, or, but it's also a natural point to go, actually, there's a review period in here. And I think when there's a defined review period like that, everyone has an expectation that, look, there has to be a look at this thing from both sides, and is it good for another 3 years or not? And when you look at something over the next 3 years, that's quite a long time horizon.
It is.
And it's a lot better to do that than have someone who's just sitting on the board and you go, hey, your time's up.
Would you tend to have people for a full 3 years in that initial stage, or would you tend to have some shorter terms? And I guess one of the things that comes out of this is you ultimately don't want your terms of all of your directors ending on the same year.
No, you don't. So you want to stagger it, so that, exactly right. I've been at one of our startups that we did. The person that I took over from, was really like an operational COO was their background, and that was great for setting the business up on day one and getting the infrastructure going and the piping and all that. And then it was more of a growth distribution story. So I came on after a year, and I've been on that board for a number of years now.
Right. So potentially when you first, and you don't necessarily have a board on day one, right? Sometimes the founder will start the business off for a few years and then reach a stage of maturity where they want to. Yeah,
you might have an advisory board, but having terms, but more importantly, when you're assembling the board, is around expectations, right? So, we're bringing you on for this purpose, and the director should be asking this as well, like, how long do you think you might need me for? If it's something specific, if it was entry into another market, that's quite a different thing than if the business is mature in there and so forth. So if there's something in that scope that lends itself to a certain period of time, then that really should be made known up front.
So you might bring a director on in the early stages in particular for 1 or 2 years rather than a full 3-year term.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, it does take a while to add value as a director, otherwise you're probably more into like an advisory, which is a little more targeted and it's a bit more specific. And we've had an advisor in one of our businesses, and he was a board advisor, and his mandate was 12 months. Right? So it wasn't worth bringing him on for the entire governance journey, nor did we want him in the business doing the doing, but he bridged the gap between the board and for what we needed in that specific 12-month period, and at the end of it we shook hands and said,
thanks very much.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What skills are critical at startup that become less relevant at scale, and vice versa?
Yeah, so I think in those early days, it's resilience, right? As Mike Tyson says, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, and we've all done 3-year strategy plans that last about 5 minutes, right? And so it's having that ability to, pivot and deal with things, but be a stable resource for the CEO or the MD, because they're the ones in the middle, right? And the way that it gets, as a CEO was articulated to me, he said it's like being in the middle of a hourglass. I've got the board here and I've got management here, and kind of that lonely bit in the middle where all the tension's coming through. And you get a lot of that in those early days.
Yes.
It's great ideas, and then, you got competition, you got product, you got pricing. The biggest thing is probably people that come in that are generalists at the start, and as the business grows, they get more specialised. But one of our businesses, the MD in there hasn't managed people before, and I personally have done a lot of it. So, I'll tend to help them out on some of those things on an advisory basis, because you're hiring and, restructuring and growing. And so it's a lot more around that growth piece, whereas a little further on it's a little bit more around monitoring.
Right, so would it be fair to say then that in the early stages the time commitment for other than the chair would be a lot greater because you're doing a lot more of that hands-on support, and that as the business scales you're kind of stepping back to, as you say, monitoring and maybe doing board meetings and committee meetings and so forth?
I absolutely agree with that, because if you look at founders by their nature, they're entrepreneurial. They work for themselves because they don't really want to work for anybody else, and they literally start with 2 or 3 people, right? But as the business gets more successful and you're going, well, hold on, you've now got a leadership team of 8 people and you need to be doing KPIs and performance reviews and policies and procedures, and their eyes glaze over, and that's not really for me. So that's quite a different skill set.
Yeah. When a company first starts up, its board is, as you've mentioned before, likely to be consist of people that the director knows who might most likely have invested in the business in some way. Yeah. At what point should independent directors be introduced to the firm?
Yeah, it's a good one, because there's no doubt that in startups and early stage there are some directors that will buy their seat, right? Because they'll go, well, I've put in X amount and I've got X percent, and therefore I should have 1 seat on the board or a representative in these things, right?
Very common with VCs.
Very common, and the founder sort of sits there and goes, well, look, I really need the check, and then this sort of person comes on, and it doesn't mean that they're actually fit for purpose or not, right? I've seen plenty of those things where you sort of get in and you're like, everyone's here because they put money into the company, right?
Yeah.
And the way to break that without sort of going to them, hey, your time's off, and having a board blow up, are the independent directors. And once again, it's back to, okay, what gaps have we got? You get a lot of directors, who've been accountants and been lawyers, and years ago that was probably a good thing to have on a board, and it was where governance kind of naturally ended up. But now it's more around strategy and M&A and other things that you've done to grow a business and these things. So, having an LLB or you're a chartered accountant's not enough, right?
Yep.
But that's down to the chair to manage that, and bringing on an independent, at least 1 or 2 is quite good too, because also when people have bought, or been shareholders or are shareholders and they're on a board, there's voting blocks and other dynamics that get in play, and I've seen shareholdings weaponised around the board table because of that, and having an independent director can be a circuit breaker.
Right, and you've got the issue there where your duty as a director of a company is to the company, not to. It's
a really good point, and I have to remind people of that you have appointment rights and you're there, because so and so appointed you or whoever it was. Yeah, your duties under that are to they're to all stakeholders.
Yes,
right,
yeah.
And that's really important.
Another interesting question that comes out of that, if you're in an exciting startup and looking at a role as a director coming in independently, there must be a real incentive to say, I want to put some skin in the game here because I'm really excited about this business. So how independent do independent directors remain?
Yeah, so I invest in the companies that I'm on the board of because I like the story and I like the people, and I think shareholders on the whole like to see directors have skin in the game. The IAD rule, which is the one I kind of go with, is anything over under 5% is you're classified as independent.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So as long as you're not, a majority shareholder or a
Yeah, you can't be. I mean, some of the ones I'm involved in, I am a non-exec, not an independent director. Probably, I think I'm into maybe 2 of my 6, something like that.
So an insignificant shareholding.
Yes, yeah. One day, hopefully significant.
Well, or hopefully the business just scales such that you're less.
Exactly.
How do governance expectations shift once you mentioned this before, the institutional investors, once they come in? Once your VCs and your PEs and stuff come in and say, we want a seat at the board, how do the governance expectations change?
Yeah, it changes quite a lot, and particularly around the flow of information, the cadence of reporting, and the quality of it as well, right? You have a different expectation because you have to remember that, VC and PE investors are therefore their investors. Right, and so they've got reporting that they have to do because they've got some of these funds are actually pretty large. They won $200 million, and they could have NZ Super as one of their investors, or ACC or whatever. So they've got to report back to their people too. So whatever they need, it kind of flows through, and it ends up in your boardroom.
Yeah.
Right.
Does the cadence of the meetings change? Because presumably once you get your institutional investors will often be in the boardroom, but not in the business.
Yeah.
And we've talked before about how in the early stages you're very supportive, and in the later stages you're stepping back a little bit more. So when you're stepping back, you tend to want meetings about every 4 to 6 weeks, right? So you get that regularity of reporting. And how frequently are the board meetings at the early stages? Are they also frequent because you're doing so much, or does your cadence change?
You'll probably find in the early stage like it's every month. And having been a CEO in a business where you're reporting to the board every month, there's a lot of work that goes on for that, and it can be a major distraction because the board members want their board papers out 3 days, 4 days before the meeting. Your board pack could be, probably, 80 to 100 pages. You've got to get it all from your leadership team, and you've got to critique it. So there's another week. So, you're starting to work on a
reporting cycle to reporting cycle.
Yeah,
right?
and so you've got to look at it and go, well, what's the benefit of that? So, a couple of the boards that I'm on at the end of last year, we're well established now, and we said, okay, well, let's make the governance fit for purpose, because you can always have an unscheduled meeting if there's a problem, right? And so one of those ones we've moved down to sort of 8 a year.
Okay.
And then another one we sort of do every second one via Zoom, and it's more probably around, like dashboard reporting and a little more operational around metrics and those things.
Yeah.
And then the others, they're all in person and they're way more strategic.
Okay.
And that's how we kind of...
So your reporting differs for each of those meetings?
Yeah.
Okay. And are your meetings then tied to, and because with a number of 8 makes it quite difficult, are they tied to quarters in some way?
You've got to do it around, like say year end, and then audits and things like that. There's definitely things that you go, okay, we need to have them around these dates.
Yeah.
And you all want, your final budget sign-offs and all those sort of things need to be done by sort of March and those things. So, we always sit down usually November the year before, and we'll do the annual board work plan.
Right.
And then we'll look at the meetings and then make sure that everyone can make all those. So important to have your holiday schedule well in advance. And then we roll with it from there. And look, there are times where you've got to go, hey, something's come up, we all need to jump on a call for half an hour. And everyone knows that that's an expectation, but it's not that often you have to do that.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Where do boards most often get it wrong during this transition from startup to scale?
Hanging on too long, right? As I said before, I've got more value to add, and and it's no different than if you've ever had to transition a CEO out of a business, like that's a tough gig, right? And it's no different with directors and also with chairs as well, right? And I was talking to someone the other day, and they asked me a question. They said, we've actually got quite an established board, and we've got directors that sort of turn up late, send in apologies, leave early, and these things, right? So and I said, well, to me that sounds like they're no longer engaged, and they've actually been on the board quite a while. So when you're starting to see times, it may be signs of fatigue, or even boredom, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But you want people there for a reason. And as I say to the CEOs that I'm chair of, look, your board meeting is your chance to sit down with these 4, 5, 6 people and actually present the issues that are really keeping you up at night and what's keeping you awake and what you need help with, right? That's what a board meeting should be about. I've seen CEOs come in and they treat the board meeting like an audit. They just don't want to be there and get asked the tough questions, right? So you've got to change that narrative and encourage people to be in there. That means you've got to have the right people around the table.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so this, as you say, the ones I've still got more value to add, but you'll get to the point where the value that you add is less than the value of the other person that would.
And that's sometimes you might say, okay, well, we kind of get that, and why is that? It's because of A, B, and C. Okay, well, A, B, and C will be done within 6 months or done in a year. So the next AGM, we want to bring in someone different. So there's softer ways to do it.
Yeah. Right.
But you don't want to leave it hanging out there and ignore it.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I guess a good director should also always be of the mind that their time on any board is going to be limited.
Yeah.
And they should see that cycle. And when you do your board evaluation or work through your skills matrix, you should say, actually, I'm not the right person for this role anymore.
Yeah, look, I absolutely agree with that. And but ego can get in the way. But most of the directors that I'm on boards with, they've all been senior executives, C-suite. They've dealt with these problems in their own leadership teams all through the course of their career.
Yes.
So they shouldn't be surprised at any of this because we've all had to do it as execs. Yeah.
Yeah, right. You've alluded to this a little before around the frequency of reporting and how that can become distracting from running the business, particularly in the early stages. What's the right way to phase in governance without overwhelming the business?
Yeah, so it's about being fit for purpose and going, okay, what is it that we want to achieve out of out of the board and the board meetings? Because reporting for reporting's sake, you might as well just send out the pack and send in any questions. You've got to be able to toss around these ideas and the issues. So what we do with our CEOs is in their CEO report they'll actually have, these are the 3 or 4 things I want to talk about at this board meeting, which they should have agreed with the chair up front. And these are the 3 or 4 things that are keeping me awake and the issues I've got to deal with, right? And the good thing with that is it focuses everybody going, right, we've got to talk about these. And we can all read finance reports and HR reports and, operational reports. That's just kind of given. And you can take it as read, and if you've got any questions, but you really want to spend the bulk of your meetings talking about that more the strategic things.
Which also would make the CEO feel more supported. These are the things I need help with.
Yeah, well, like I say, before, you've got to give them the environment to go, actually, I've got to bring these things to the table. Because occasionally you do come across something, and the worst thing as a director or a chair, my policy is no surprises. And that works both ways.
Yes.
But having those, and look, things happen, I get it, but also there's usually some lead indicators, and you go, well, why didn't you tell me? We could have dealt with it and these things. So you've got to provide that kind of safe environment for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
A final question for you that's very general.
Sure.
What's the best governance advice you've received?
So when I first started down this route, I had a coffee with one of New Zealand's really well-known directors, and he said to me, it's never been harder and never been easier with respect to getting into governance. And easier from the sense that the old boys network from years ago, where they probably did all these things and got each other on the same boards, probably had their meetings at the Auckland Club, that's all gone. But he said it's harder in the sense that what is it that you bring to the board, right? And I've had loads of ex-colleagues from companies I've worked with in the past ring me up, and I go, I've left my exec role, now I want to get into governance. And I go, well, that's fine, so what are you going to bring, right? What's your elevator pitch? Oh, finance or this or that. And I'm like, well, they're operational things that we've already got a team doing, right? And so it takes quite a bit to get your head around, what is it that you bring that is of interest to someone that can really help look back and go, actually, the business went from here to here, and I was a part of that, as opposed to functional expertise.
Yes.
And I think it takes quite a bit for people to get their head around it. And it's not normally, when I throw them that question, it's not normally one that they can answer. I mean, I couldn't when I first did it. And I actually went away, and it took me quite a while to get my head around, okay, well, where do I want to play? How do I want to play? Like I say now, with, early stage, high growth businesses. And I like those because it suits me better to get involved, help out. I like the excitement and the challenge of it. Being in a big corporate, coming in every 6 to 8 weeks with 700-page board packs and asking the same questions just doesn't spin my wheels. But I know plenty of people that do that. So when I got asked, that was on the end of that comment, it really made me think, actually, and which is where I've ended up. But it took a while to get there.
Hence, as you also suggested earlier, the move in some spaces away from having boards full of accountants and lawyers.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
People that have diversity of experience.
Yeah, I mean, you really want people that have, been there and done it from a range of perspectives. We've got entrepreneurs on our boards, we've got CEOs, senior execs, people that are on offshore expansion, all these things that are really tied back to the strategy. Yeah, so that when you're tossing an idea around the table, you're getting 5 different perspectives on it. And that's really important. Otherwise, you get groupthink and confirmation bias, and that doesn't really help anyone out.
Nigel, that's been really cool. Thank you so
Pleasure.
much. I look forward to catching up again soon.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
See you next episode. Thank you for watching this episode of Governance Bites. We have more episodes on YouTube and your favourite podcast channel, where I interview directors and experts on various topics relating to boards of directors and governance. We'd love to see you back, and please like, subscribe, and share the videos and podcasts.